U.S. Navy 11-inch Dahlgren Number 235 is displayed at White Point Garden, commonly called the Battery, in Charleston, South Carolina. It's the direct witness to some of the most amazing acts of heroism on both sides of the American Civil War. It was originally mounted upon the ironclad USS Keokuk. Keokuk was designed and built by Charles Whitney of New York in 1862. It was launched at the end of 1862. The ironclad was designed to be as lightweight as possible and as fast as possible. To save weight, an innovative iron and wood armor scheme was created. The ship had a flat bottom and a turtleback deck. The two turrets were non-rotating. It's easier and simpler to rotate the gun inside the turret rather than, like Erickson did with his monitors, lift the entire turret off the deck to turn it. Keokuk was an innovative design. When she attacked Charleston with the ironclad squadron of Rear Admiral Samuel DuPont on April 7, 1863, Keokuk was placed in the very back of the line. It seems DuPont knew something of Keokuk's limitations. The attack of the U.S. Navy did not go as planned. Weehawken, the lead ship, turned to avoid what looked like either torpedoes or obstructions. They were actually range marker buoys, and the Confederate gunners ashore found to the range very quickly and began to hit the Union ironclads. The monitors backed up behind Weehawken. The flagship USS New Ironsides, a powerful armored frigate that would more than prove her worth in battles to come, struggled this day. In the narrow channel with a veritable traffic jam of monitors in front of her, moving slowly, her crew struggled to keep her even under control, and Admiral DuPont had to signal the squadron to disregard the flagship's movements. USS Keokuk did exactly that. The small ironclad, with powerful engines and twin screws, surged ahead of the other ironclads and took position at the head of the U.S. Navy line. For this initiative, as she was nearest the fort, she was rewarded with the combined attentions of the batteries at Fort Sumter, Fort Moultrie, Battery B, Battery Beauregard, and others. In the course of half an hour, she took at least 90 hits, 14 of which penetrated her hull at or near the waterline. Others went straight through her armored gun houses, causing casualties. Keokuk went to the head of the line. She went past all the other monitors. She went nearest the forts, but it's not explained why in the official records. Keokuk's captain, Commander Rhind, in 1864 was selected to be captain of USS Louisiana. Louisiana was a steamer taken into Navy service and filled with 215 tons of gunpowder. Connected to clockwork fuses, Rhind and a small group of sailors intentionally ran Louisiana ashore right next to Fort Fisher, set the fuses, and escaped in a small boat. Had anything gone wrong, had the forts fired a single shot at Louisiana, it could have ended explosively. Rhind got away, Louisiana detonated. It didn't do the damage to Fort Fisher that was intended. But still, Rhind was the kind of fellow who would drive a literal floating time bomb ashore against a fort. In short, he was a brave fellow. And the pilot of USS Keokuk, he was none other than Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls was an African-American man who in May of 1862 gathered on board the steamer SS Planter in the middle of the night, some of his close family and friends, and took SS Planter out past the Confederate forts, including Fort Sumter, pretending to be Planter's captain, and took Planter out to the U.S. Navy offshore. In that instance and in other instances during the war, Smalls showed that he was an incredibly brave individual. So you had in the very small pilot house two very courageous people standing right next to each other, Rhind and Smalls. And I can't help but wonder if these two courageous people standing next to each other could not think at all of turning aside, like almost all the other ironclads did, but instead used their ship's speed to surge past the traffic jam and get at the forts. Keokuk was an innovative vessel. She would have made a good ram. However, her armor utterly failed her that day. The courage of her crew, her commander, her pilot was not met with the strength of the vessel. Keokuk, the next morning, was taking on water. It turned out that all those shot holes were giant and ragged, and nothing could be done to plug them, and she eventually sank just off Morris Island. The Navy attempted to destroy the wreck, but they couldn't quite do it. And the Confederates, looking at this ship just off their shore, realized that she mounted 2 guns which were heavier and better than anything they had in their forts. So they put an effort together under 2 engineers, the Lacoste brothers, who came out to the ship night after night in that 2-hour window when the tops of the turrets were above water at low tide, and they worked in darkness and as quietly as they could to pry off the roofs of the turrets and the structural support beams and pull out the giant 13-foot-long, 8-ton Dahlgren guns from Keokuk. With an amazing amount of endurance in the cold sea spray, with not a little bit of luck, they managed it. They got the Dahlgren guns ashore. One of them, after some preparation, was mounted at Fort Sumter and would be there until the Army bombardments in July and August damaged Fort Sumter to the point that the Confederates had to remove most of the heavy ordnance. It was taken to White Point Garden. The battery there built during the war was called Battery Ramsey, and it served there through the end of the war to protect the city of Charleston itself if the U.S. Navy had ever gotten into the harbor. After the war, it seems to have been sold for scrap. It probably no longer exists. It may. I'll get to that later. The other Dahlgren was taken to Sullivans Island and mounted in Battery B, a fort just outside of Fort Moultrie. It would serve there for the remainder of the war. It participated in a September 8th, 1863 battle when USS Weehawken grounded near Fort Sumter, and other U.S. Navy monitors came up to assist and got in a furious battle with the forts. Serving there through the end of the war. At the end of the war, it was abandoned. Its wooden carriage rotted away over the years. It fell to the ground. It was covered in the shifting sands of Sullivans Island. In 1898, U.S. Army soldiers at Fort Moultrie seemed to have excavated it. It was then moved to White Point Garden. An effort was underway to create a monument there, a display of the history of the place that had served as a fort during the war and to serve as a monument to the defenders of Charleston generally. John Johnson, who had been a Confederate engineer officer during the war and who was, by the 1890s, both the author of a book on the defense of Charleston Harbor and a clergyman who was the rector of St. Philip's Church, seems to have organized the effort, or at least directed the historical aspects, the technical aspects. Several interesting cannon were selected, chief among them 11-inch Dahlgren Number 235, which had come from Sullivans Island. It was mounted on a carriage that had been intended for a U.S. Army 10-inch Rodman. There are a couple of those at Fort Moultrie today, and it may be mounted on the carriage for one of those guns. By 1901, it was in place. U.S. Navy 11-inch Dahlgren Number 235 is a monument to soldiers and sailors of the Civil War on both sides. It's directly connected to Robert Smalls, one of the great African-American heroes of the Civil War. It's directly connected to other acts of heroism in incredibly dangerous circumstances on both sides. It is a gun which saw service in the U.S. Navy and Confederate Army. To me, it's one of the most historic artifacts of the Civil War, and it's also something that is not locked away in a storage center in a museum that you can't touch. You can walk right up to it and look at it directly. It is an amazing artifact to visit and a tie to the U.S. Navy's early ironclad program, USS Keokuk, and the courage of soldiers and sailors on both sides. I mentioned that the other Dahlgren probably no longer exists. In 1877, a load of scrap iron was placed aboard the schooner Philadelphia and was taken north for scrapping. It wrecked off the shore near Georgetown, South Carolina. About 20 years ago, a group of mariners there formed a salvage company, I believe called Long Bay Salvage, acquired rights to the wreck, and raised 6 of the heavy guns from that wreck. And I've photographed 2 of them. I've seen photographs of a third. I understand that 2 others are in private hands, and 1 is actually available right now at the Horse Soldier in Gettysburg. Something like 20 heavy cannons still remain on the wreck. I have no idea what's there. If someone does, I'd love to hear it. But I kind of hope that among them is USS Keokuk's other Dahlgren. I'd love to see it raised. I'd love to see it displayed in the Charleston area to help tell the story of the valiant soldiers, sailors who served in the Charleston campaign. Friends, thank you for listening. On this page, I try to tell the stories of sailors of the U.S. Navy and those they fought alongside and against, and try to remember all of them. Thank you so much.